2020 was a year that will go down in history as one of the most devastating years in recent times. It was a year filled with lies, sickness, deaths, and murder. It was no surprise that most of us welcomed 2021 with open arms, hoping for brighter, better, safer days. We were anticipating a time when things would return to normal. Unfortunately, the new normal may not be anything to celebrate. In the first 3 months of 2021, Columbus, Georgia, a city with a population of just under 200,000 residents, recorded 25 murders. With 46 murders in all of 2020, Columbus is on their way to a record high. Averaging a murder every 3 days, the third largest city in Georgia has the state highest murder rate. But this by no means is limited to Columbus. In major cities across America, the murder rate is trending up. In 2021, we are already up 20% over last year. People are concerned. Citizens want to know what's going on. To find answers to their questions, we have assembled a panel of experts and stakeholders. My friends call me Kai, and for the next hour, join me as we begin our journey to find out what's going on.
Mother, there's too many of you crying.
Columbus police are investigating the city's third murder of the year. The coroner is reporting the city's 18th murder of the year. This makes the city's 5th homicide in 7 days. Columbus residents are calling for answers regarding the city's rise in murders.
In the first 3 months of this year, there have been more than 1,000 murders. In this hour, we will talk to stakeholders, subject matter experts, and frontline insiders who, despite their differences, all agree there is nothing cool about killing. Sonia, I want to first say thank you so much for being here and joining us today. I know that this is a very difficult time, as yesterday was the anniversary of the death of your son, Julio, who most passionately call him. And so thank you again. Sonia, considering your personal experiences, how are you managing this sharp increase in murders?
I used to think before I went into the military that Columbus was a safe haven. That changed when my son was killed. We're scared to even come out our door. You know, I live in a okay neighborhood, and I have a 14-year-old and 11-year-old, and would not allow them outside my door without me being there presently. You don't know who's going to come down the street and shoot up the neighborhood or what have you. So I don't think that it's safe.
Sonia, we're on track for 100 murders this year. What do you think is going on?
I think some of it might be the environment that they're creating for themselves or that they're in, the lack of dreaming, the lack of motivation around where they live. You know, they don't seem to see outside of their living areas. I don't think they can see past that life can be better.
Mm-hmm. We will hear more from Sonia later. To gain insight into what's going on, we were able to catch up with respected neuroscientist Dr. T. Owens Moore, who serves as the Distinguished Chair of the Psychology Department at Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Moore, to what do you attribute the dramatic rise in murder in 2021?
Well, we can talk historically at a point, but right now, as we look at the pandemic, that's where a lot of the concern is. It's as if, why is there a spike in these murders when the pandemic's going on? And the correlations are there. So, and it's not just in one city, it's pretty much throughout the United States. And it's just, even in your little world as you travel, you see people are just hasty and people driving fast and people are just anxious in terms of just going to the store if you see somebody with or without a mask. So just in general, the pandemic has created a lot of fear and anxiety in people. That has an impact on how people respond to their environments. One key reality here, though, is when we look at the pandemic and you say what has happened during this time period, people have been isolated. The laboratory experiments, I mean, my area is neuroscience. I've studied for my PhD, looking at the behavioral effects of anxiolytic substances like diazepam or Valium that's supposed to slow you down. In animal models, we created where an animal could be in a cage by themselves. And if you isolate them for weeks, it makes them more aggressive. So now you think on a grand scale of the world and the pandemic and isolation, it's not just America where you see more violence or these so-called murders that are happening, but it's associated with people probably being alone and by themselves, and now it triggers a change in their reality. And so rather than just saying physiologically that's the cause, we're just dealing with the dynamic of being isolated from people and then not interacting, not communicating, not having the right way to have interpersonal contact. It makes it a challenge for people to deal with others in society. So that's why we then see a higher incidence of, I guess, say murders or crimes during this pandemic, but we can certainly talk historically. Before the pandemic, we had problems. It's a socio-political issue. I just explained to you with the pandemic and the issue of isolation, it's a biological problem in the context of how we're seeing so many, 3 months into the year, and we have a high incidence of murder. Well, why is that? It has a lot to do with people being isolated, and now they're coming out to the real world and now having interactions with people. The point is, when we say historically, if you don't have a job, you don't have any money, you don't have access to resources, guess what? Those are scenarios that can create an environment where you're going to lash out at the closest persons to you. And that's why I think even in places, I think it's reported in Columbus, about domestic violence is high. Well, why is that? If people are in the same household trying to build together, well, there's just something that's been broken down. That's the family unit's been broke down. So when you start talking about historically, when those foundations aren't there to keep people together, no matter if it's Hispanic, white, black, whatever, if those foundations are disrupted, and we know through the experience that people of African descent living in this world have experienced, the family unit has been pretty much disrupted. Therefore, you have an environment where you, even though you have an isolated community, if the family unit's broke down, then you don't have any support systems.
COVID-induced isolation, adding to an already bad situation in many cases. Interesting. We will come back to Dr. Moore. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Miss Teresa El Amin, a stalwart in the civil rights movement.
Well, Columbus is unique. It's a city that prides itself on being the first consolidated government in Georgia. And in my experience, when the county and the city consolidate, it dilutes Black political power in the city. So Columbus, since its founding in 1828 during slavery, has always been a city that has been controlled by folks who do not look like the majority of people in Columbus. And so there is a high level of poverty that stems from that kind of disparity in political power in the community. Yeah. And the poverty is so deep in this community. In some areas of the city, when you drive through the back of Casita Road, you could think that you were in Haiti. That's how bad the poverty is. So when you got children, 30% of the children in this community are in poverty. And poverty breeds crime. People do tend to make a way out of no way. And sometimes that way tends to be the wrong way. So children, when they get to be teenagers, they're not gonna go hungry. And they're gonna figure out a way to feed themselves. And in some cases, feed their families. And that gang activity that's taking place, I think it stems from that kind of need, the poverty, the root cause.
You know that in the black communities, many people have the menial jobs. They don't have access to making a living where they can actually live off of that. So they have either multiple jobs. If they don't have multiple jobs, guess what? They might be doing something under the table to make a living. So the system's structured for some people not to be able to survive and thrive. So how does that happen? Why? Because in a system like this, powerful people, this is like, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. John Henry Clark, but he's one of our powerful Jegnas. He has talked about history from multiple perspectives, but powerful people do not teach powerless people how to take their power away from them. So when you deal with these communities and the brothers and the sisters that are just trying to survive, they're in a system where a foot's on their neck. What I'm saying is that the system has no interest in solving the problems. They make money off of what people being in the criminal element. Prison system, I mean, the prison industrial complex. Some people don't want that resolved.
The 13th Amendment says that you can become a slave again. You're free from slavery unless you've been convicted of a crime. So the state of Georgia uses the 13th Amendment to have 25 work camps all over the state of Georgia, and the largest work camp being here in Columbus, where Columbus turns out over 400 prisoners every day to actually work for the city. People who have been incarcerated are the only people who are legally discriminated against. They don't have to give you housing. You can't get public benefits. People don't have to hire you.
Slavery really has not ended. It's just transformed to another form of peonage. Douglas Blackburn wrote a book called Slavery by Another Name. White guy wrote that book. Talking about that dynamic of how the penal system really is just an extension of what was going on in the slave system. 13th Amendment deals with all that. Looking at the system structured for you not to rise. The system structured to keep people in certain places.
We are going to pivot and catch a conversation that I had with Savannah's mayor, Van Johnson.
Mayor, in your experience, when a city sees a spike in murders, what has been the contributing factors?
Well, in Savannah, it's been a couple of issues. Usually it's been crime committed by black males on other black males, and it's usually dealt with an altercation that centered around either drugs, money, or women. And somehow or another, when you get to the root causes about that, drugs, money, or women, or something.
Can you describe what that experience was like?
Well, as a rule, as often as I can, particularly when it's part of one crimes, if there's a shooting or a homicide, I try my best to be on scene. I'm a former law enforcement officer, but I think it's important that people recognize that these types of incidents should not be common. And so I think that the mayor's presence on the scene lets not only the police know, but also lets the community know that there's something extraordinary about this behavior.
What is Savannah doing to combat gun violence?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted issue that requires a multifaceted solution. Here in Georgia, guns are allowed everywhere, and yet then we're mad when guns show up everywhere. So there's a legislative piece in which we continuously advocate for our state legislative delegation to do the right thing and have common sense gun laws. This is not to say that we're against the Second Amendment. We just want guns in the hands of people who should have them. So I think that's one part. The other part is that we also make guns readily too available to those that are breaking into cars. People still leave their guns underneath their seat. They leave their guns in their glove compartment and think that nobody will notice there. Well, that's where a lot of those guns come from. We're also speaking to parents. You have young people that you know are in that life. If you love them, if you care about them, care enough about them to get them out of that life and turn them in if necessary. It is much easier to turn a child in than to have to bury your child. And then I think we have to be able to create opportunities as a community for young people. How do we know the young people that have jobs, have educations, have a tomorrow to look forward to, don't have time to do crime. And so it's our responsibility to be able to create those opportunities, make sure the children are literate, make sure that they can succeed, and help them to see tomorrow. So that's through mentorships, that's through a bunch of community activities that are focused on that. And I think finally, ultimately what we have to be able to do with dealing with it is that we have to deal with our police and how they police.
Dr. Moore, gangs are often identified as the source of crime. Is this warranted?
People seeing outside and looking at the White House and looking at the Congress and looking at all these people, even though you now have Kamala Harris in there, why isn't that a gang of white people? Every year. When all you see is them making policies on what you need to do to survive. And what do you have now all over the country? Nothing but voter suppression laws being created by a gang so that the gang can remain in place. We don't discuss it like that. That's the narrative. But now you have people in Congress trying to make a change, but again, you have people who are going to vote against their own interests. Many people knew that man who was in the White House prior to Biden coming in wasn't a good person, but whatever we got to do to maintain control. That's all it's about, maintaining control. Are the Black Panthers a gang? Well, some people might want to label them gang, because if you ask people, who were the Black Panthers? Well, they carried guns and they were violent. You ask people about Malcolm X, who don't know Malcolm, oh, he was violent. Malcolm X never shot anybody. Black Panthers were for self-defense. They had breakfast programs. They came up with this term called Black Identity Extremists under this last man's administration. The Attorney General says, when he was questioned about this in a congressional hearing, I'm not sure what that is. I have my people who have been researching that. Yeah, right. Black identity extremists is another way of labeling somebody as a gang. So from Black Lives Matters to just 3 black people hanging on the corner, that's a gang. Now you got policies set up if 4 or 5 people hang out more together, then that's a gang. Who's describing the narrative? Those who don't want to see something that happened to grow and develop. You heard of the Nation of Islam? Do they call Nation of Islam a gang? White people probably like to call them a gang. Under Farrakhan, there was something called the Dope Busters. You ever heard of them? They used to be around D.C. They used to help out with getting rid of the drugs in the community. Dope Busters. Brothers Without Guns, getting the brothers off the streets. Yo, man, don't be doing that in the community. Take that somewhere else. We have to do that. So it comes down to us respecting ourselves to create programs that can do that. But if we don't have anything that's in place and not supporting one another and not serious about it, we'll just continually be taken advantage of. So as we define what gang is, maybe we need to just change the word and not say gang. Maybe it's a collective group of people trying to just survive. They've been around for years. Why? Because they've just been trying to thrive and survive. So gangs today are not new. The issue is the activities that they get involved in. And most of the time it's dealing with drugs, narcotics, illegal substances, because they can make quick money off of it. So we cannot disregard the government's activities involved in that. Where are the drugs coming from? Just saying these are examples of decimating the community. It's not like the gangs want to go do that. They're just trying to survive. If that's easy money, guess what? They're going to do it. And someone's going to take a blind eye to that because they ain't worried about them little black people killing one another. The problem is when you start crossing over and coming to them other isolated communities, black people or non-white people who don't have, they're looked at as things. That's why a white person can have their home and they can have a black or a non-white person serving as their servant in the house and not understand anything about that person because that's just a thing helping you out in your house. So I think this thingification of people creates a problem where, as you said, things can happen in the media and there's no uproar. So a black man could be sitting in his house eating ice cream and a white woman comes in and shoots him in his own house saying she made a mistake. Is there really any feeling for him? That's the thing that happened down in Texas. And then in that whole case, the judge is coming down from the stand, this hug this white woman who just killed a black man, and the black man's brother is now going to squeeze and hug the white woman who just killed this. So they're people, we're not people. Breonna Taylor, we now have this whole situation where she's in her own house, resting, sleep. Same thing that happened to Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. They're things, they're not people. So in that context, it's easy to dismiss them, and then in the media, there's no real paying attention to the realities of these people who are human beings, but you're not looked at as a human being. You're the thing. This drug culture has been created. Amos Wilson wrote a book called Black on Black Violence, The Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. I always say and tell students, just listen to the subtitle. The Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. So you can go sell your little drugs and kill one another, we don't care. And then all the stories, and you can see all this on TV about the corrupt cops that are involved in daytime, locking up the gangsters, at nighttime they pay them to go kill other gangsters. The stories are there. How do you not solve Tupac Shakur's murder? How do you not solve Biggie Smalls' murder? If all these people are around when it happened. It's a drug culture. They don't care about that stuff. So we then get caught up in that, and how it's being done psychologically is that they create desire. And say the system creates desire for things, material. Like that's going to define you. Material and things are not what should be defining you, but the system creates that. So what? The gangs want to get the fancy cars. They think they got to have the nice little girls. They got to have the nice threads and things. When we don't look at and we don't appreciate ourselves, this self-hate comes into play, and that's why people then will say black people are the problem. Not the system, black people. They can't pull themselves up by the bootstraps. They ain't got no boots. They ain't got no shoestrings. There's no boots to talk about. But that's not the story, no. So the whole discussion about reparations, what is that? To restore people for what has been taken from them. This government has never even thought about that, doesn't want to talk about that. So when you deny the culpability, you deny your reality of what you've done, you're in the responsibility for it.
So what is the impact of identifying gangs as the problem?
Let me establish this. Joe Biden is the head gang member of the Democrats. Trump is the head gang member of the Republicans. Then you got the little independents around there. They gang members too. They jump gangs though. They're no different. They're no different. Everything that they do it for their gang, right? They do it for the Democrats or they do it for the Republicans. And they're praised for it. But you have a person, he's been elected in his gang, and they put him at the top of the pedestal, and he's doing for his people. It's frowned upon by white people, it's frowned upon. So that's kind of bad though.
The narrative is the problem, and he who controls the narrative is going to dictate how things happen and what it comes from that. So by them labeling black people in gangs, it looks like they are then some types of thugs.
Once you place that word into the equation, right? Once you say, this is a young black male, 19 years old, graduated from high school, or whatever he's got going on, then he said, he's a gang member. Right then, the paradigm shifts. And so I think that prosecutors and law enforcement have learned that they can use that terminology in order to shift the paradigm and almost throw everything back, years back into the past, things that we've actually started trying to move past. The ability to be able to dehumanize someone, right? I mean, our job as defense attorneys is to bring this person out. Right? They're more than just a file. They're more than just this incident that they have allegedly been involved in. They have a mother. They have a father. They have, folks that care about them. They have community ties. They have a story. And when you see a person as a person, then you tend to treat them more fairly. But when you can change a person, right, into something that is synonymous with being nefarious, right? You change them to a gang member. Now you've taken some of that humanity away, and it makes it easier to convict them. It makes it easier to convict the jury that this person is not important enough for me to consider them in the same way that I would consider myself or someone that I love.
So what's the attraction of gangs?
For African people, interpersonal contact is a very important axiological reference point. When we say axiology, we're speaking of things that are important to you as a people. So that's why this whole pandemic and isolation is not good for us as a people, because we need to be around, we need to be in communication. And so the gangs become a great environment for people to have their own posse, people that they can relate to.
The history is really for protection, so that the black community or the young people will have something to be a part of and have backup. So that when you have a problem, you have somebody to have your back to help you solve the problem, just the way the police do nowadays. I had my experience. I used to gangbang, and I used to be into it. And I got into it, me personally, I got into it because I wanted the protection, the love, and the family, and the camaraderie, and be a part of something great. It's the part of when somebody takes a loved one or a fellow member of yours that's real close to you, or a member off the earth, you have to retaliate, and the only way you can retaliate and get even is take one of theirs off the earth. When black people started gang banging and stuff like that, that was because a lot of drugs was involved in it, and it's a lot of money. And believe it or not, whether you're doing business is business, illegal or legal, and people have to eat.
Safety, a lot of times, for one thing. A lot of cats, don't have the courage to stand and be a man. A lot of them ain't been raised by men to taught how to, you can be your own thing and not worry about having to deal with consequences because you don't want to be a part of what someone else got going on. This begin at some point to start being a security blanket for a lot of young cats that live in certain areas where it's a lot of, crime and stuff going on, or you might be going to school with a neighborhood where a lot of cats who grew up who might be this gang. You don't live over there, so these boys who you live by are the ops of that gang, so you kind of, I'm gonna roll with my neighborhood now. So now you kind of then grew to get in the game without even, by default, kind of, out of fear, kind of. They wanted protection a lot of the time. Some of them, it was just because it looked cool now. We got a lot of successful people that come from the same environments. The projects, the hood, where we all grew up. But those people, kids don't get to see them. You don't see doctors come around, and if they do, they ain't dressing for attention. But what they do see is gangsters come around, drug dealers come around, and they look appealing to the kids. They fresh, they got the women, they got the money, they got a lot of things that, if you tuned into what they hearing now, if you don't got that going on, you ain't got nothing going on.
Would you agree that in our community, they are influenced by social media, the music industry, the limelight?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think, to think otherwise would be preposterous. Yes, it definitely influenced. It's crazy to even think otherwise.
It's almost like belittling you if you're not, in a sense, having some kind of motion, some kind of action going on where you, the man, are next to the man. So, you got things like that they coming up, growing and hearing and getting sucked into,
Be in the game because, these the people that got your back. People just want love and attention, man, real love, brotherhood, attention, The ones who got your back, the ones who stand up for you, that's your gang. That's who you that's who you embrace with. You know, gangs got bad sides and they got good sides.
What ages do gangs target for recruitment?
I feel like 6th grade, 7th grade, by that peak of that time, it's like when you got to keep up, you got to be fresh, you got to deal with the neighborhood, you got to go outside and play, you got to fight. As long as he go to public schools, he gonna be introduced to gangs. You know, that's just my opinion. I feel like you got to be very focused to come from where we come from and not get involved with gangs. You got to be, and this is not just a household. You can come from a good, decent household. When you go to public school, when you walk outside your neighborhood, can you handle these streets? And that's why a lot of people push more to gangs. You know, that's where they come from, that's their environment. You got to get out here and get involved with the streets, you know. Either you're gonna go play basketball somewhere with a gang, or you're gonna go sell drugs somewhere with a gang. You know, when you come from where we come from, it ain't too many options. Yeah. Ain't no skateboard and all that round, whatever. You know, you got to get with the program.
To gain a better perspective of what's going on with future leaders, I spoke with Dr. Stefan Lawrence, a nationally respected educator. There's been quite a few murders here in Columbus, Georgia. How has that impacted your students?
It's impacted them in a number of ways. One is that this generation of student is very curious, very inquisitive about how the world works. They obviously see crime on the rise, and in particular the question you asked about murders as being a problem. And it's almost scientific, like the scientific method. You notice a problem, you put together a plan of action to solve it. And so they ask the right questions about, you know, why is this happening? Who's doing the murdering? Who's being murdered? How much time are they getting for these offenses? Who's giving out the time? Very, very deep questions that I personally don't remember asking when I was their age. And so that is a positive that's come out of it. I think that's a positive impact. Negatively, several of my students have been impacted personally by a loss. We got a brother, a cousin, an aunt who was killed by violence, and the impact on these young children is devastating at times.
I agree. Now, at your school, do you have counseling for some of these students?
Yes, ma'am. But that's don't get me on my soapbox. That's one of the things we got to fix in education. I don't think we tend to the holistic child enough when it comes to their counseling needs. We have an amazing counselor at my school, but she's one, and as you heard, I serve roughly 550. That is right on par with the national average. It's right about one counselor per 400 kids, and that's not good. So when we think about one person serving 400 of anything, getting to school is, I think, 50% of the battle. The neighborhood or society oftentimes presents so many stumbling blocks to our children, and they're in a world now where everything is so transient when it comes to their attention, that they can be easily grabbed by things that are productive and things that are counterproductive. And once we have them in the school with talented teachers and you know, administrators who care, normally we can get what we need out of the child. But trying to get them in the building is I would say 50% of it.
So do you think a lot of it is their surroundings, and their surroundings do impact, you know, the education process of the child?
Oftentimes, yes, ma'am. You see, sometimes you have parents that will allow children to miss days at a time. Regrettably, you know, we have to get the social worker involved. Sometimes you have, you know, students who moms, the student is one of 5 and mom is a single parent working. And that child at 13 might have a large workload put on them as far as what they're expected to do. So the situation varies per child. I do acknowledge that many of them come to school with a disadvantageous background. They don't have the things readily available to them that many of their colleagues or their cohorts have. That's another gap that education has to fill in, and that's one of the reasons why I get so upset when I see that every time funding needs to be cut, it's cut to education, because we quite literally fill so many societal gaps. You know, you see ups in teenage pregnancy, you put in sex ed. You see up in child obesity, you change the lunch. You see ups in teenage driving accidents, you introduce driver's ed. Every social ill that America looks to heal itself from, they look to do it through education. And yet, when it's time for some funding to be cut, we're normally first on the chopping block. It's maddening. But I do think that we have to acknowledge that many kids come into school without opportunities that other people have. This pandemic has pushed us as a society to the limit. My students are struggling academically because they're not used to this. They're struggling socially because they're not used to this. They're struggling mentally, emotionally. And I think that Esther is right. Like, this is our royal position. Everybody has a royal position. And I would like to see, talented people such as yourself just invade schools to just tell these kids, you did a good job, and let me show you how to do an even better job, and just put your arms around them, bring them in, teach them a skill or two, or maybe just listen to them. The more we have of that, the more children understand that they are active participants in the community, and the community views them as a precious commodity. I think the more gains we'll see as in Columbus as a whole. And I'm not saying that a cure crime. I don't want to insinuate that. But what I do want to insinuate is that people get desperate when they feel like options are limited to them. And the more people feel as if they're knocking up against a ceiling or that a cap has been put on them, they will buck against that.
Why can't they just get a job? Go to work?
Where are those jobs? If I know some people now that's looking for work, where can I direct them to? Where can I tell them that you can go and have a job where you can purchase a house and become an owner of something? You can get a car and become an owner of something. You can take care of your family. You can have health insurance. And that gives them some kind of, well, I don't think I want to go out here and risk all of this because I own something. Where can I direct them to? Where's those jobs? So we can't just say stuff and not have a plan of action to send these people to, because that's what they're going to ask. Where can I go get that job at?
It really still ain't hitting home with them. Even though they see it, a lot of them make things like, oh, it's a choice, it's a choice. Well, that's easy to say when it worked out for you. It's a lot of people that try to go the right way and it's just not working out for them. They can't. They trying their best. And the only options they have is to maybe try to start selling drugs, maybe try to start finding a way to get some kind of money, scam to get money in their pocket to feed their families or whatever.
Well, jobs do not solve the problems. Jobs that you give me a job, okay, you give me a job I can barely take care of myself with. I'm a grown man trying to take care of a family of 4 or 5 with a felony conviction. Oh, and then the housing is just ridiculous. The only place y'all want to give us somewhere in the project or give us a housing voucher, and you control our lives then. So, that's a never-ending story there. So it ain't about jobs.
It's a different feeling when I could come in the house and instead of mama worrying about Christmas, now you coming in the house and you already gave mama $1,000 for everybody gifts, your sister them gifts and all that after what you got going on. And it's hard to talk a person out of that situation to go into what, your situation? Do we sad at Christmas?
Why can't you make it? We did. Wasn't always easy for us either.
I think Ta-Nehisi Coates, written several books, is a world-renowned scholar, has squashed that when he was at the congressional hearings dealing with reparations, and that question was asked, and he talked up to Mitch McConnell and all the other white folks about, well, where did you get your trust fund to go to school? Where does the property come from? Where your family gave you so you could have your own household? So the lineage and the linkage to white money, that's part of slavery. If it has nothing to do with it, then give that up. You know, so you started off on a pedestal and higher versus someone lower, and to say that that happened years ago, well, why did you get in the pedestal? How did you get in that position? So we cannot deny the reality is that on both ends, it's still impacting us today. And that's why I'm saying the whole issue of self-hate. I don't know, is there any degrees on slavery? Are there any institutions that even study slavery? That was trauma. You got white people today that wouldn't take $1 million to be a black person. Trauma. We're talking about experience that took you from your land, changed your name, changed the food you eat, changed everything about your thinking about how you see the world, and then you come to a new world. Beyond us thinking about America, you got the same thing in Brazil, India, other places where we've been taken. So when your mind's been extracted, you got a bad situation. I'm just saying those people who don't see it, they don't see the global problem. They only see the black people because they've been educated to think and programmed to think black people are the issue. When the reality is, if we could start focusing on us and our community, guess what? We'd probably solve a whole lot of problems.
Man, they don't have no idea what's going on, man. It's like, they can't see the same I seen 400 years of slavery. I seen all the projects that we came from. I see black people catching up, and they still act like, you know, we supposed to be on the same. Well, that's a whole nother story, but that's just, it's crazy. You got to be black to feel my pain, you know what I'm saying? You got to be out here amongst my people to really understand this. Like, they don't even understand Black Lives Matter. Why they keep saying Black Lives Matter? We the got the worst. We the scums of the earth, and you know what I'm saying, other than Latinos or whatever, but they still, I don't know, it's just like they'll never get it, they'll never understand it. But I feel like you just got to be black. You can't speak on this. You can't understand what we're going through unless you're going through it, unless you come from poverty and, you know, public schools and prison and streets where I came from, you know, where kill you for nothing, you know what I'm saying? You had to be tough growing up, you know what I mean? There wasn't no such thing as bullying. Everybody got bullied, you know? So you got to come from our world to understand where we come from and how we think.
The white people I'm talking about who kind of usually have those perceptions are ones that their communities are away from ours. They're not the ones that really grew up. You got some, you know, poor white people that grew up with us, that their mentality about that is a little bit different than the ones who grew up and wonder what's going on because they in the safety of their secure homes, secure neighborhood. You know, they don't have to worry about police killing their kids. They don't have to worry about where my next meal coming from. You know, you inherited a business. A lot of these people, you stepped into living situations where you ain't never been a part of the struggle or seen the struggle.
But when we deal with justice, that's where the problem is.
People with felony convictions. This is an interesting place. It's like more people have been in prison here than I can imagine. But then the city itself uses prison labor. So that's the example that people have to see every day. In most cities, the people who pick up the garbage are paid workers. And in many cases, they're paid union workers. But here in Columbus, the people who pick up the garbage, who do the recycling, who work at the DMV, they're prisoners. Slavery by another name every day in this city. And that's what children have to grow up seeing. And unemployment in the black community is exceptionally high. Nobody will deny that. But those jobs that are being done by prison slave labor are jobs in many cities that are done by African-American men. These are the systemic problems that Columbus has been ignoring for decades. Decades. And I think it's time for change.
I don't understand what this has to do with crime. Justice is justice, no matter who you are.
The justice system is not serving things equally. Bruce Wright wrote a book called Black Rose, White Justice. We see it every day.
Justice wasn't served. The kid who actually killed my son got 8 years. So no, I don't think if he was white, it would have went that way. 8 years would have been what he would have got maybe for going in them people's house stealing their guns. It would have been some separate stuff, and he probably would have been in that 30 or 40 years. So I don't, no, I don't.
Lady Justice, as she is called, should be blind. But justice is dispensed by human beings, and we are fallible. We make mistakes. The legal field is better with people of color, women of color especially, in it, than without us being in it. So we just have to kind of go and trudge through it. And I know it's difficult. I'm not the only person it's difficult for, but I feel like the whole situation is better with us in it than with us not being in it. Well, being a black person and being a prosecutor, you know, that's a very thin line to tread, because on one hand, I can see everyone's point of view. I can see that sometimes officers are really doing their job, and it may look like they're being discriminatory in some manner, but they're not, because everyone, the public may not know the basis behind why they're acting the way they are. Now, as a prosecutor, I can also see when a law enforcement officer does something that's so blatantly egregious, so blatantly repugnant, that it is what it is, and you have to call it for what it is. You know, and I don't want to try cases before they're tried, and what I mean by that is to say what should happen over here or what should happen over there. But I know oftentimes we can see with our eyes what happened. And those of us who know a little bit about procedure and how things should go know that that was out of procedure, that was not the way things should have gone. So yes, it is difficult to be a black prosecutor, because I've had some friends say, I don't even know how you can do that. Cece, how can you put people in jail? And sometimes I answer, because some people need to go. Everybody doesn't need to go to jail, but you know, somebody breaks in on your mother and snatches her pearls from her neck, that person would need to go to jail.
Well, because it's most certainly not blind. I mean, this is from a defense attorney standpoint, and so I think the ideas that we have, or ideals that we reach towards, are for justice to be blind, of course. But I've argued this a million times. We'll go into cases and they'll say, you know, hey, the defense attorney's arguing the race card. And I said, well, you know what, there's no such thing as the sky's blue card, right? There's a heightened presence in a certain area of town, right? Heightened police presence. That factors in to whether people are pulled over or not, right? So it's strange at every step, right, of the process, it factors in. So now we get all the way to justice and we say, oh no, it doesn't, we're going to be blind now. Not at all. I just don't see that.
So what's the solution?
Organization. The revolution, we say the revolution can be killed, but you can't kill the revolutionary? No, you can kill the revolutionary, but the revolution can't. Whatever it is, we got to do that. We got to teach people. This younger generation, they don't know who to follow. So they following somebody who just killed somebody. That's my boy right there. He killed somebody, I'm gonna kill somebody. That's not life. So now you have the whole prison system where they now go to prison and your boy's in prison, or your girl's in prison, and now you're following what they did. That's not the models to follow. We have to create the right models to follow. So again, if you're not taught that, you're not gonna know that. If you're not reading the books, not saying everybody gotta read, people ain't reading today. Fine, we'll provide some other ways. YouTube now. Send them to the YouTube presentation. Y'all already are hanging out in gangs. Hey, come over to this spot. We're all gonna have a conversation about something. And so that's when it becomes a threat to people who are continually trying to control you. That's why if we don't understand that structure, again, Frances Cress Welsing tried to tell us white supremacy is about maintaining control. And unless you understand that racism equals white supremacy, we will never get out of this. It's not like white people can't help, but why should we be waiting on them to solve the problem?
We just all need to work together. And when we get together to talk about these things, we need to talk about solutions. And I know that we're all hurting, we're all saddened, and we're all upset, and we need to vent. But when we get together, we need to be more solutions oriented. Okay, this is a problem. We know what the problem is. These are the three things that we need to do. These are the three things churches need to do. These are the three things that if you're in a civic organization, or you're in a sorority, or you're in a fraternity, these are the three things that you all can do. And, you know, these are the three things that can be done at the community centers or something. We need to come up with something concrete, finite, succinctly to do so that we can bring about an end to this.
Just come out and just have some type of thing twice a year, even once a year. That's a start. You know, where we show that we're getting together and not hurting each other, not fighting each other, not killing each other, you know, and having conversations about moving forward, about building.
And come up with a plan. All right, you got this resource, all right? I've got this resource. Maybe I know an individual who has a 501c3 that's going to be trying to create a diversion program for the court system. All right, now the onus is on me in order to try to help bring that into the equation of how we deal with our cases, right? Maybe an educator, right, has a different thing they bring to, well, I see these kids that I'm dealing with that are going in a certain way, you know, and I can put this into the pot in order to try to help you all on a preventative side, right? Maybe you got law enforcement that says, all right, you know, I see it from this way, and this is what I can bring to the table. I said, once we get everyone together and all the resources that we have and bring them to the table, then I think we can start formulating better plans. And, you know, it's much easier said than done, but I do think that's a task ahead of us.
Until we control our own communities, the black-on violence will still happen. Until we are able to have some impact on reaching the younger generation, to know what is and what isn't right, we will continue to have black-on violence. So it comes down to us as a community to do that.
Stay, because all of the people who can solve what's going on in Columbus are right here in Columbus. The institutions.
What motivated you, Zeph, to do this special?
There's been inaction for 2 years, and during that same time, we have seen our murders climb, and we have not done anything. I believe it's going to take all of us working together. I'm hoping that this special will change the conversation.
When you say change the conversation, what do you want to hear more of? What is it that you want to see more of?
Well, as has been pointed out by many of the guests, we need an understanding that criminal behavior, while it is problematic, is not in and of itself the problem. It's a symptom of a problem that speaks to the socioeconomic conditions of the communities in the environment in which many of our residents live. The greater motivation of crime is the desire or need for things and the limited means to get them.
Wow. Zeph, can you elaborate a little more for me?
Well, many people talk about criminal behavior being witnessed today as un-American, as if it's something that is not consistent with this community or with this country, something that is not consistent with the values of our community, our state, this nation. And that's simply a lie. Crime, and specifically murder, thievery, and trafficking, is exactly how America was built. Settlers of America, let me remind you, killed 12 million indigenous people, stole their land, and then confined them to the most undesirable land in America. And then once they had stolen the land, they went to Africa, kidnapped Africans, and created the largest slave trafficking business ever. They kidnapped millions of Africans from their homes. Even the conditions under which they were transported were so horrible that more than 2 million people died in transport. 1/2 million were brought to this land to build this country. That's free labor for 400 years and counting. Because remember, in the 13th Amendment, you have where slavery is prohibited except where people have committed a crime. So let us be clear, crime is forever in the DNA of America. So to act as if the indigenous people were the savages and that black people are the criminals is beyond insulting. Criminal behavior has been taught to every generation of Americans and reinforced for centuries. Our current experiences are the result of centuries of abusive criminal behavior by those in power. So to suggest that we are not a violent nation is absurd. And I won't even talk about the nearly 1 million Americans who were killed in the Civil War.
Zeph, did you have any final thoughts?
Well, I hope that viewers listen to the pearls of wisdom that our panelists shared, because, we've got to make some changes. We've got to make some changes in the way we handle ourselves and our future. It's 2021, and yet we still have black people who are choosing the white doll as if it were 1940 all over again, when they do business, when they hire service providers, when they vote, and when they shop.
Zeph, I want to thank you so much for your insight and for doing this special. We have reached the end of this leg of our journey. I want to thank our panelists for their contributions, and I want to thank you for watching. There were some hard truths presented, and we have some difficult decisions to make. We cannot change our future without making changes to our present. We need to forge new relationships, have new conversations, and expect new outcomes. The future of our city, our state, our nation is in our hands. Now is the time for us to take control of our destiny and create the safe, productive, and prosperous community we deserve. I am Kai, and until next time, remember, there is nothing cool about killing. Organizing is the solution.
Frederick Douglass said it best, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. And the more and more we educate these children, the more and more they'll see a world that has been hidden from them. And I do think we'll see a uptick in peace.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it is. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it is.